We get through 3,000 million gallons of it a day in this region alone. For generations, we've simply taken it for granted. But now, with the water authorities about to be sold off, more and more customers want to know, is it really safe to drink? 10 years ago, we would have needed to go to France to find a supermarket selling so much bottled water. But this is Southampton, and typical of supermarket stock throughout the south. Customers at this one store are buying 50,000 bottles of water each week, and the manager expects sales to double over the next 5 years, as concern grows still more about the quality of the water we drink.
Well, I bought the bottled water because I prefer it to tap water, and really didn't like what was coming out the tap, so since then I've been buying this. You don't know what's coming out of the tap water these days. I mean, we've got so much going on with food poisoning and everything else. It could be, anything could be in the water, especially living in the country.
Yesterday, the public's worries about water reached Downing Street. A national petition opposing privatisation was handed into number 10. Labour helped organise the protest. It says an industry newly geared to profit would be unlikely to spend enough on ensuring water purity. We used to assume that here in Britain all water was fit to drink. It's the growing public uncertainty about whether this is still true today that's brought the Environment Minister, Michael Howard, here on a flying visit to the southern counties on what amounts to a hard sales trip. Once Britain led the world with the quality of its water, but just how pure is it today? The whole question of water purity is potentially a major embarrassment to the government, as Mr. Howard and his colleagues try to sell their plans for privatising the industry to an apparently hostile public. Tonight, Facing South reveals that officially conducted tests have shown that more than 20 water sources in the south recently contained quantities of dangerous chemicals above the legal limits set by the common market. These fresh disclosures come at a time when the government is already threatened with legal action by the EEC for failing to meet the drinking water standards that we'd promised to meet by 1985. Britain's quarrel with the common market has a particular irony for one part of the southeast. Thanet in Kent is the most intensively farmed area of the south. It's the cabbage, lettuce and rhubarb centre of Britain, producing up to 3 crops a year. High yields have been encouraged by common market farming policies, which guarantee that everything produced is bought. But it's made possible only by the heavy use of nitrogen fertilizer. And the same EEC that promotes intensive farming has also set a legal limit of 50 milligrams of nitrates per litre of drinking water. In Thanet, it's a standard that can no longer be met. This is the result. The Whitehall Waterworks is one of 3 sources in Thanet that the Southern Water Authority has had to close down. And the nitrate levels in Thanet's 3 remaining sources are so high, the water has to be mixed with supplies from other areas. Today, the residents of Margate, Ramsgate and Broadstairs get a water cocktail. 60% of the mix has to be pumped in from elsewhere to ensure the supply meets legal health requirements. So just how dangerous could nitrates be? The conservation group Friends of the Earth says available evidence, though far from conclusive, fully justifies the common market limit.
Nitrate has been linked to a certain health problem which is called blue baby syndrome or methemoglobinemia. We recently obtained a government document, a memorandum from the Department of Health, indicating they were puzzled about reported incidences of blue baby syndrome when nitrate levels in the water range between 50, which is the legal limit, and 100 milligrams per litre. The legal limit should be upheld as a precaution there.
There have also been claims that high nitrate levels in drinking water contribute to stomach cancer. Again, there's no proof, only suspicion. But many experts do counsel caution, among them Dr. David Wheeler, formerly a scientist with Wessex Water, who now heads the Water Research Unit at Surrey University's Robbins Institute. Next week, the university hosts a European conference on water quality, which the government has declined to attend. Among the subjects for debate, the possible hazards of nitrates.
The health implications of nitrate contamination of drinking water are still in dispute. Many commentators believe that the European level of 50 milligrams per litre is too strict. Other commentators believe that's not strict enough. I think where you have a difference of view of that nature, it's probably wise to err on the side of caution.
A government report late last year acknowledged the possible dangers of using high levels of nitrogen fertilizers. But the warning came late in the day. In the past 15 years, there's been an 81% increase in applications of nitrates to arable crops. In 1986, nearly 250,000 tons were used in the southeast alone. The government may now invoke a clause in the current water bill to impose nitrate restriction zones. But in Thanet, local farmers strongly deny being the cause of the problem. And they say the consequences of restriction zones would be dire for what is already one of the South's unemployment black spots.
As far as Thanet's concerned, I think there's somewhere around 2,000 people plus employed in agriculture. If we were in fact to go away from our present system, we would probably only employ perhaps 30 or 40 people to keep sheep, because without nitrates, that's all we could keep. We would just be growing grass. But it must be borne in mind that if all we do is to grow grass in Thanet, then when that is ploughed up, it's going to release more natural nitrate, which is taken from the air and from the sheep.
In fact, the South's problems are less serious than those in the rest of Britain, according to a survey by the Water Authorities Association this week. Even so, there are growing concerns about the long-term effects of pollutants such as nitrates and chemical sprays. Uniquely for Britain, only a small proportion of this region's water is extracted from rivers, like the Itchen outside Winchester. 3/4 of the South's supplies, far more than any other region, are obtained by drilling deep boreholes to find water trapped below the chalk levels in what are known as aquifers. It means the water we drink conceivably came down as rain at the time of the Battle of Trafalgar, nearly 200 years ago. The years it takes to percolate through the ground means a crucial delay in detecting pollutants in what would otherwise be the purest of sources.
That water tends to be of much higher quality, so we're quite fortunate in the South in having a large proportion of our water derived from these sources. But there are also dangers, of course, which is that if you do introduce contaminants into the soil, into the ground above these aquifers, they may take some time to actually appear in the groundwater resources. And again, it may be too late when you realise you've got a problem.
The time-lapse means any rise in nitrate levels discovered today could be the fault of previous generations, and in days gone by there was simply no concern about fertilizers contaminating water. The manure and seaweed spread then contained huge quantities of organic nitrogen.
My ancestors, my great-grandfather died in 1916. His generation were putting on seaweed, throwing it on the land ad lib, which was followed by farmyard manure, and really the application rates were as much as a man could get on. There was no actual metering of the nitrogen as we do now.
In Thanet, farmers like David Steed have voluntarily changed their ways since more has been discovered about the possible dangers of nitrate. By spreading smaller quantities more often, he's now putting some 20% less fertilizer on his 300-acre farm. Another initiative has been taken by the private Eastbourne Water Company, which recognized environmental problems back in the 1960s, which the rest of the industry was slower to tackle. The company draws much of its water from the chalk downs behind Beachy Head. All this land is owned by Eastbourne Council and let to tenant farmers. Company, council and farmers have a long-standing agreement to restrict the amount of fertilizer put down to protect the water supplies.
We've had problems with nitrates in this particular area, but the company, through foresight and through working together with the local authority, has kept those problems well under control.
Frequent laboratory tests on tap water supplies are all part of the Eastbourne Company's cautious approach to nitrates. In the scientific world, there's still disagreement on whether high nitrate levels are dangerous to the human system. However, there's no doubt about the dangers of another potential water contamination hazard. Highly toxic pesticides and herbicides are now being used in record quantities. Farmers once again have been positively encouraged by EEC subsidies that reward overproduction. The chemicals are so widely used, it's been hard for environmentalists to assess just how much harm they've been doing, and it's proved hardest of all here in the south. Although water authorities keep constant checks on their supplies, there's no public right of access to their findings. Last year, Friends of the Earth published a national survey of water standards. It was a detailed study, but there was one major omission. Alone out of the 39 public and private water suppliers in England and Wales, Southern Water refused to cooperate.
They've been holding out on us for a long time. They thought we were going to, in their terms, misuse the information. In fact, what we were trying to discover is whether or not drinking water supplied in the southern region met the legal requirements set by the European Community.
Southern Water finally relented and released its data to Friends of the Earth last month. It reveals that on many counts, the EEC requirements are simply not being met. The Burham Treatment Works in Kent is one source that would concern the EEC. Most of the water for the Medway towns is supplied from here, but the Southern Water figures show that supplies from Burham on 2 consecutive tests, late in 1987, contain traces of chemical herbicides well over the maximum permitted EEC limit. One test showed a quantity of herbicide 13 times higher. Most of the water treated at Burham is pumped from this reservoir half a mile away, Eccles Lake. A test carried out here last November by Southern Water found substantial traces of dieldrin, an insecticide used mainly as a wood preservative. Its use as a farm pesticide in Britain was banned only 2 weeks ago, following similar action in many other countries. Dieldrin is classified by the World Health Organization as extremely hazardous. The proportion of dieldrin found in Eccles Lake last November would be 20 times higher than the WHO's safe limit if it carried through to drinking water, and 5 times over the safe limit set by the EEC. Some scientists say any pesticide, even in reservoirs and rivers, is a cause for concern, and particularly when it's a toxic insecticide like dieldrin.
If that surface water, which contains some 0.5 micrograms per litre, is being used for drinking water treatment and supply, then I would have some concerns, because obviously that pesticide is unlikely to be removed particularly efficiently by a water treatment works, given conventional treatment in this country. And so it is possible, at least, that some of that pesticide is being carried over into the water supply zone.
Southern Water says there's been no subsequent indication of dieldrin in Eccles Lake, and anyway, those findings relate to surface water, not tap supplies. However, the authorities' same tests revealed another highly toxic chemical, gamma HCH, better known as lindane. It was a container of lindane lost in a shipwreck last month that caused the full-scale alert in the channel. Had the contents split open, marine life could have been devastated. The legally enforceable European Community standard for lindane is 0.1 of a microgram per litre of tap water. The surface test from Eccles Lake found nearly 3.5 times that amount. Lindane has been rarely found in the south, but weed-killing herbicides widely applied throughout the region are regularly reaching tap water supplies. Most common are atrazine and simazine, used not just by farmers but also by local councils and by British Rail to kill weeds along railway tracks, often very close to waterworks. The latest available figures from Southern Water found both chemicals present in water tested from 22 treatment plants, boreholes and reservoirs right across the south, ranging from Manston in Kent to Andover in Hampshire. While Southern Water admits the figures do exceed the common market norms, they are within limits set by the World Health Organization, and the public, it says, should not be alarmed.
They should have no cause for concern at all. It's not a health problem of any sort. It is really a problem which applies in all European countries. All of them have got a problem with pesticides, but at Burham we do occasionally have a level which exceeds the EEC directive but does not exceed the World Health Guideline, so that the advice we've received from the department, and you must remember that the EEC directive applies to governments and not directly to us. We merely interpret them as instructed by the government, and the instruction to us is that the main concern would be the World Health Organization's guideline, and in no case have we exceeded that.
Southern Water believes the EEC limits on herbicides and pesticides are unnecessarily tight. But some councillors are calling for more openness. They're annoyed that details of the tests at Burham and Eccles were not supplied to the local council, Tunbridge and Malling, or to the councils in the Medway towns where the water is drunk. The district councillor for Burham is David Young.
What I believe is that the water authorities should be giving these figures to the local councils who have responsibilities for environmental health, and a programme of improvements of what they're going to do in the future should be coming up. Obviously, the case of increasing the limits is important, but the onus is for them to prove that they can increase the limits safely.
In the meantime, though the government has so far resisted ordering water suppliers to meet the EEC standards, its hand is now being forced. In Brussels, the community's environmental commissioners are threatening legal action against Britain and 5 other member countries for failing to comply with drinking water standards.
The Drinking Water Directive was agreed to by our government and the other governments of Europe in 1980. The legal standards which it sets came into force in 1985, so the government had plenty of time to take the action necessary to ensure compliance. Well, the government didn't take the action necessary. It misinterpreted the directive quite willfully, in our opinion. We've complained to the European Commission, and the Commission has now started formal legal proceedings under the Treaty of Rome against the British government.
So the government would be held responsible for breaches of standards by any water supplier. Meanwhile, Friends of the Earth is still trying to establish whether any of the dieldrin and lindane found in Eccles Lake and elsewhere in the south is getting through to tap water. The southeast has another special problem. Water supplies in many areas show signs of running short. The ford through the River Darrant at Ainsford is one of the standard calendar views of Kent. Today's water level is the right height for young paddlers, but in early spring it ought to be much higher. The new homes of northwest Kent, where the population has doubled in 20 years, have proved a drain on resources all too literally. The drop in water level has alarmed many of the locals.
Well, they've got 9 pumping stations in the Darrant Valley from Westerham down to Dartford, and they just extract more and more water from the ground, and that is lower in the river. This field over here used to have watercress in my father's time. It was that wet. Well, now you can walk on there any time of the year because the level has gone down. It just shows you how much the water level has dropped.
And as water levels recede, the potential dangers of farm pesticides may well increase.
As the population goes up and there's an increased need for water, more and more water is pumped out of the ground. This means that river levels go down and pesticide and nitrate levels, which run off agricultural land along the river's edge, are going to be concentrated in the water. This means that fish, insect life, and the reeds and weeds that grow in the water are increasingly endangered.
But to what extent are people endangered? The water authorities maintain their supplies are as pure as ever. And the Environment Minister, selling the government's water privatization bill, told us standards will rise when water companies are freed from the government's apron strings.
When water's in the public sector, it has to take its place in a queue with hospitals and schools and all the other very desirable things that need public money spent on them. And the result is that it doesn't always get enough money spent on it. When it's in the private sector, it will be able to have access to private sector resources to get the money that's necessary to see these improvements put into place. The consumer will be protected by the Director General, who will set the price at which water can be sold, and in that way we shall all be better off.
But Labour warned only yesterday that it would renationalise the water industry. It strongly contests that privatised companies will put extra emphasis on improving water quality, and says consumers fear precisely the opposite will happen.
I don't think they believe, and I share their view, that these things can be safely left to private enterprise, because private companies are always going to be torn by the dilemma between making profits and paying dividends to shareholders and getting a return on capital, and the need to make very long-term and very expensive investments in water quality and protecting the environment. And that is why the bill go so stupidly wrong because it has this internal contradiction written into it.
Supplying water that's fit to drink is already a massive and costly undertaking, and the water authorities say it's only improved analytical methods that have heightened public concern about a product that's never been more pure.
The perception of the public, partly because of all the talk by environmental groups, has suggested that water, drinking water in this country, is worse than it was and is now unsafe, and this is just not true. The water is better than it's ever been and is perfectly safe to use.
Scientists still disagree about the possible long-term effects caused by the tiny proportion of chemicals found in water. Treatment plants were designed to eliminate bacteria often spread by sewage, which could cause diseases like cholera and typhoid.
What's the road, please?
Filtering out chemicals is vastly more difficult and might mean virtually rebuilding the waterworks that supply us. As it is, the government has made clear that improving water standards to the level that the public wants and the common market demands will be expensive. And the Environment Minister, on his visit to Hampshire, made clear it's the consumers who'll pay.
If we want this big clean-up, if we want fresher rivers, if we want cleaner bathing waters, and if we want purer drinking water, clearly that has to be paid for. There's a lot of investment that's needed, has to be paid for, and prices will go up, not anything like as much as some people have said. They'll go up because we want to achieve those improvements.
For many consumers, those price rises have already started. In the past few weeks, there have been some hugely increased rate demands, and these not from the big water authorities, but from companies that are already private. Half the households in the south are served by long-established private water companies, like the West Kent, which supplies Tunbridge Wells from this 80-year-old reservoir at Pembury. Overnight, the West Kent water rate has shot up by 42%, the highest increase in Britain this year. And West Kent is not alone. While publicly owned Southern Water has kept its increase to 7%, private companies have set much bigger rises. They're doing it now because next year they'll come under the same legislation as the new water PLCs, and the Environment Minister will be able to control their charges. West Kent Water says its steep rise is a direct result of the new tougher water standards, coupled with previous government policy to peg prices.
The government asked us to keep our increase in charges below the rate of inflation since 1982. And nearly all the companies have responded to that request, and we've responded by being very prudent in where we spend our money, strictly interpreting the old definition of drinking water quality. Now those rules are being changed at a time that's coincided with the privatisation with the authority.
Until recent times, the main water purification problem for West Kent Water was filtering out the iron content from its supplies. Shoveling away the resulting sludge is a small problem set against the new task of meeting EEC water standards at the very time when the basis of the company's finance is being changed. Until now, private companies have been classed as gilt-edged investment. If they needed extra money, they simply issued bonds at guaranteed interest rates. Now, because of the water bill, they'll have to go out into the open money market and hire extra technical staff as well. Other quality problems mean more expense, like scouring corroded water mains, which affect the taste and colour of supplies. Routine but costly maintenance. New EEC directives cover this too. The result won't just be cleaner water, but higher bills as well.
If water was delivered to the door like milk, an average family would need 850 pints a day. That's an entire milk float load per family.
TV adverts put out by the water authorities are reminding consumers of how much they've taken for granted in the past. An expensively produced sales message to prepare the public for the cost of what's claimed will be a better water service. In today's climate, there's more emphasis on public relations. Eastbourne Water Company, for example, has set up an office specifically to provide the public with full details on water quality. In the new age, water is a product like any other.
The customer, when he goes to a supermarket, buys himself a pot of yogurt, and when he comes home, he can have a look at the pot and see exactly what's in the yogurt. Now, I think the same should be true for water. Customers do buy water, they have no choice where they buy it from, and I think it's very, very important that they know what's in the water.
It's good PR, but many consumers are still opting for rival products. Even as water rates in the south increase to record levels, we're spending another £4 million a week on bottled supplies. A sure sign that public confidence in the quality of tap water is not improving. There's growing awareness that what we allow into our water today will affect not only these youngsters, but their children and grandchildren too. Protecting them could cost a great deal and mean a drastic change in what we spread and spray on our fields and gardens. But without that commitment, future generations will never share the confidence we all once had that in England it's safe to drink the water.